Hello, folks. How's it going? Hope you're all well. Nice sunny day here. Well, partially sunny, partly cloudy day here in Countryside, Illinois. Beautiful downtown Countryside. And this little video is intended to kind of give you some context as to, well, for the upcoming series of Prokofiev videos that I want to put up here, starting fairly soon, maybe even as early as maybe as early as this weekend. And how I got into this, and why it's important to me, and what I find to be interesting about it. How I got into the actual Prokofiev repertoire that we'll look at over the next few weeks or so is as follows. When I was living in Downers Grove, Illinois, I would frequently, especially during graduate school, on summers when I was home, I would make regular walks to the library to read books that were there. And I'd leave them there so that I would read them there, and I would read other books at home, and I wouldn't be doubling up. And one of these I passed by for years. I noticed it being there in the biography section, was of Harlow Robinson's biography of Prokofiev, the first edition. And as I would frequently walk by that volume and make a mental note saying, yeah, I really should pull that down and read through it at some point. Which I did, and learned a lot in so doing for various about Prokofiev and his life. One of which I think was very interesting. Some people, Prokofiev could come off sort of like a pampered child occasionally, and the reason for that was because his two younger siblings, I think they were younger siblings. He had twin siblings who died very young when Prokofiev was still a boy. And as you can probably imagine, the natural reaction to parents when something like that would be to cherish and to become even more protective of the children that they have left. And that kind of thing sort of influenced Prokofiev throughout his life. And I also kind of think it might have been one of the reasons why returning to the Soviet Union was attractive to him, because when he first got there, for the first several years he was there, he was, well, kind of treated like a kind of celebrity, because, yeah, here we have comrade composer returning from decadent West into into communist Russia, you know, and so I think that it may have, but mind you, towards the end of his career, he started getting his fame and influence and fortune started to dwindle by the time he was older. So that's one of the things that got me into this learning about his life and just the events of it. He, by the way, died the same day that Stalin died. And interestingly enough, I think it was the Borodin Quartet, or a very famous Russian string quartet, was literally ordered by the government to play, I think it was the third Tchaikovsky quartet at Prokofiev's funeral. And people object, say, look, Prokofiev hated that piece, but they told them, look, you play it anyway. So that's also kind of interesting. The other thing, and along with that reading of Robinson's book, I made a point of when pieces were being discussed in the book, I procured, I'll say maybe 15, 20 recordings of various pieces that were being discussed, and I listened to them, and which was also very, 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 very helpful. And I came away with learning. I came away with learning and having a fuller context of his musical output. I was particularly blown away by the second string quartet, which is just incredible, and it was written when he'd been removed down into the Southland to escape the invasion of the Nazis during World War II, and it's based on it's based partly on some kind of folk music. I don't know what nationality that folk music was, but it's in part based on that. That's which I found to be quite interesting. Also, I think one of the things that really blew me away, something I'd never heard before, was the violin sonata in F minor. Oh my goodness, that just blew me away when I heard it, and made me want to learn more and more and more as time went on. I heard the classical symphony, I heard 2 or 3 concerti, I heard the Prodigal Son. The Prodigal Son is sort of interesting too, because the opening of that is very, very, at least in my ears, reminiscent of the opening of the Rite of Spring, which is also very interesting. So as I was doing this, and eventually relocated to countryside, Illinois, I happened to notice that there was a local franchise of half-price books. I mention half-price books a lot because, if for no other reason than the fact that they are about the only source of books that I can still afford to buy. But while I was going through their collection one day, I happened to come across a used copy of the Dover edition of Prokofiev's shorter piano works, not the sonatas, but the shorter piano works. And I thought to myself, hey, now there might be a way to further contextualize my reading and appreciation for Prokofiev as a composer, as a pianist, etc., etc. So I bought it and brought it home and started looking through it. And as I was working through it, I seemed to notice, I noticed that there was a kind of, well, composers are creatures of habit. And there were some particularly interesting, or what looked to me like interesting, like habits that Prokofiev would return to for I mean, not all of the works in this volume are like display this, but a good many of them did. Sort of dealt with interesting uses of the Neapolitan sixth chord, particularly the minor Neapolitan relationships. Say, for example, in the key of B flat major, right? The minor Neapolitan, of course, would be C flat, E double flat, and G flat. And we'll look at an example of that in due course of time, where the last chord, and there's a really interesting last chord in one of his, I think it's one of his pieces called Thoughts, Opus, I think it's Opus 52, I think, that has an interesting havings to do with the minor Neapolitan. But it was also just how it was used, like structurally, in various ways, how it was reused. And it seemed like, in particular, with the Golden Mean, or the Fibonacci series, seemed to be important and at work in a number of these pieces. And as a scholar of music, my principal interest has always been what I've called the creative process, or the compositional process. And by that I mean what material can be reused by not just me, but also other examples of composers of reusing material in creative ways, both as for sheer fascination with the other composers, but also to sort of try to feed my own creative workings in my own stupid brain. And I found this to be very, very, very useful. It's really fun to tear apart, for example, Ach wie nichtig, ach wie flüchtig, the chorale of setting by Bach of that, and figure out, how the text is reflected in the music that he wrote. And so that kind of thing, I've found that to be very interesting from a scholarly standpoint, but also to help get me thinking in ways. Well, how can I take this concept or what I've discovered here, and how can I apply that in my own creative work? And I found this set of, I want to say, about 5 or 6 pieces that we'll look through gradually over time, as a very, very interesting reuse of these materials in each. He reuses the same basic materials of the Fibonacci series and the Neapolitan relationships in ways that are very, very unique, or quite unique to a number of different pieces. In each piece, he takes those material and reworks them in a unique way, which of course is when we start talking about that, we are of course talking about the techniques of variation and how really basic material, can be reworked over and over and over again to create myriad varieties of music, of music that can be that are both different but yet at the same time very consistent. And I find that kind of thing to be particularly fascinating. I really find that fascinating. And over the next few weeks, I'll put a few of these things together, and we'll talk about them, and I'll leave links to recordings, and I'll also leave links to each one of the scores is already up on. I'll choose recordings that have scores that go by in the YouTube video, so you can follow along. And I will also provide a handy dandy little chart, probably for each one. And yeah, I hope you'll find this to be just fascinating. I find this stuff to be just absolutely mind-blowingly, wonderfully helpful to appreciate music of others, but also to help shore up and to expand my own creative compositional technique. Because that's what I'm after. To find stuff that will help me write better music myself. Sort of reminds me of the old line, I think it was from Mad Magazine, back in my youth. I remember a line saying, a few months back when we were perusing the competition's material, looking for stuff to swipe, and that is in many ways the kind of thing that I, at least as a composer, look for. What in this person's music can I take and adapt in my own way, and put that into my piece so that it reworks and I get something interesting in it, and hopefully people will like to hear it occasionally. It has to do with something called misprision, which Harold Bloom talks quite a bit about in his writings, particularly the map of misreading and the anxiety of influence, how influence works in creativity and in composition and emulation as opposed to mimicry. Because emulation and mimicry are not the same thing. To mimic literally just means to just parrot back what you've heard. But to emulate means to take something and do something with it yourself. So that in the words of, I think it's John Donne, that you pay back what you borrow with interest. So, I think this is going to be a fascinating journey, and I hope that you'll join me occasionally on it. I'm certainly looking forward to it. It's been a hell of a lot of fun for me, and it's all kinds of really cool stuff to think about. Stuff. There's that word again. Lots of fun. Bye for now.